In this video, we're going to go over what some of the outcomes were from the War of 1812. We're going to talk about what it meant for America, Canada, Great Britain, and the Aboriginals. So first, let's start with America. Now, since America tried to take over British North America, or Canada, the immigration was discouraged between America and Canada, because Canada felt that if that invasion ever happened again, that those immigrants would fight on the side of America, and then they might lose. So that was discouraged. The border was established between America and Canada at the 49th parallel, which is very significant because Canada and America have the largest border of any two countries, and it's pretty well protected. There's lots of places you could cross the border between the United States and Canada, and you don't have to go through any sort of checkpoint. So it's the largest shared border between any two countries in the world, and it's pretty well unmanned, and these two countries have been at peace for 200 years. Pretty significant. The Rush-Bagot Agreement. So the Rush-Bagot Agreement was in connection to the shared bodies of water. So there were two Great Lakes that are shared between America and Canada, and what this agreement said was that nobody owned the water. That both America and Canada could have one ship and sort of one fort on each body of water, on each lake, to protect against smuggling and things like that, but no one owned the water. So American ships couldn't patrol the water as could Canadians. Water was neutral. And America was able, after the War of 1812, when it ended in 1815, their focus shifted from taking over Canada and from war and conflict to expansion. Instead of going north, they decided to go west and south. And we know how it ends, right? Their country does develop in those directions. And so that's really where their focus was after the conclusion of the War of 1812. Canada. For Canada, the Atlantic colonies they developed some new trading partners. They started to trade with New England, and they had a good time, a really increased prosperity. Again, the border was established, deciding where Canada ended and where America began, and that significance of it lasting for 200 years in relative. These two countries have lived in peace for 200 years. The Rush-Bagot Agreement about the shared water, and probably the most important outcome of the War of 1812 was, for the first time in Canada's history, the French and the British colonists worked together. Upper and Lower Canada, they could claim that they had biculturalism, but they weren't mingled. They had sort of separate areas they lived in, separate governments, separate culture, separate ways of life, and they'd always been in conflict. I mean, in Europe, they're always fighting. But for the first time in Canada, in order to beat the Americans, they had to work together. So Upper and Lower Canada, after they defended their country against the Americans, there was this sense of pride and a sense of unity that brought them together, truly together, for the first time in the country's history. And this sort of connection, this unity, and this sense of nation is still today. Great Britain. So Great Britain, War of 1812 is a small little blip. They were more focused on the war in Europe and Napoleon. But the outcome for Great Britain is they were really sort of forced to recognize America as an independent country. Yes, there was a little bit of resentment there because the 13 colonies, America, were once a British colony, and they really were no longer. And Great Britain had to accept that. And they had to accept that they couldn't control who they traded with, and they couldn't control where their ships went. And they had to start to develop respect for another nation. The end of the War of 1812 allowed them to focus more on Europe and the issues that were happening there, paying off their debt, dealing with the war with France yet again, and they didn't have to worry about the conflicts that were happening in North America. The Aboriginals. Now, the Aboriginals allied with Canada, mostly, and after the War of 1812, those military alliances weren't needed. Great Britain felt that North America had been kind of settled and the major issues were over, so they didn't need them as military alliances anymore. So that relationship wasn't there. And they felt that they needed now to assimilate to the British culture. They couldn't have their own nations, they shouldn't be speaking their own languages, they needed to change their way of life and become more British. which is exactly the opposite of what Tecumseh wanted and what he and Brock had agreed to. But because Brock and Tecumseh both died during the War of 1812, the dreams and the vision of having a nation of Aboriginals died with it. And the Aboriginals, after the War of 1812, lost a lot of rights and a lot of freedoms, and they really were treated as worth less in Canada. And some of those beliefs and that tension still exists today in Canada. So when we think about the War of 1812, it meant great things for Canada and America, about our border, about being in peace, those two countries, about the French and the British and Canada working together, unifying a nation for the first time in its history. But there was a great sense of loss for the Aboriginals in North America, where they no longer had a voice because they felt like they weren't needed, and they had a country that the government was passing laws that they needed to give up their culture and their ways of life. So there was, even though there was lots of gains, there were lots of losses.